Alright guys, so today we're looking at key issue 1 of chapter 6, which means we get to start talking about religion. The first page of the chapter, first thing, the most important thing is that we're looking at where are religions distributed, which is usually the way these chapters are broken down. Is first we look at where, then we look at why, and then we look at what some examples are. And so the first thing that you see is this super awesome palace, and this is where all the Dalai Lamas lived for like ever. It's in Tibet. You guys should definitely read this because there will be stuff about the Dalai Lamas on the quiz at the end of class. But the Dalai Lamas are associated with Buddhism, and you guys are gonna need to know the differences between Buddhism and Hinduism and Christianity and all that good stuff. So yeah, that's the first page, is just basically giving a little bit of history about that and where Buddhism is and all that kind of stuff. The second page is where we get the super cool maps. Which is awesome. I like this map specifically because it shows like percentage-wise where you see a lot of religions all over the world. And you see that Africa has some of the most diverse religions, whereas a lot of the rest of the world is pretty similar to other things that are happening in that specific area. And so you get two major things that you definitely need to take down, which are universalizing religions and ethnic religions. And these are going to compare pretty easily with the idea of like popular culture and folk culture, because universalizing religions are going to be like pop culture, where it's like it's happening all over the world and all that kind of stuff. They attempt to be global to appeal to all people regardless of the location, whereas ethnic religions are going to be more like prevalent in one specific area than all over the world. And so there's three main universalizing religions and then a ton of ethnic religions, and we'll talk about all of those. But the other thing that you need to know is atheism and agnosticism. Basically, atheism is the belief that there is no God, and agnosticism is the idea that there might be a God, but there's no way of knowing what's going on. And so when you look at these maps where it says non-religious, that's basically people who fall into atheism or agnosticism, or don't really fall into any of those specific religious categories. Like they just don't think about it. So yeah, this map is super cool, and we'll get to do some stuff with this in class, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it. When we start talking about Christianity, we see that there are several different kinds of branches, okay? And this is just like languages. Branches in Christianity, specifically in Europe, you see the largest percentage is going to be Roman Catholics, followed by Protestants, and then followed by Orthodox. Those are your three main branches of Christianity, and then beyond branches you have what's called a sect. Then you have denominations, and then you have a sect. And your sect is going to be stuff that like breaks away super far. So it's not like even it's only slightly similar to the branch, whereas a denomination still has a lot of those ideas, but it's a little bit different. So something like Baptist isn't necessarily one of those three categories, but it's going to fall into the Protestant category. And we see that with Christianity in the Western Hemisphere, okay, specifically the United States. And so this is a map that was actually used on the AP test, so it's important to know this one. And you see that Baptist is super prevalent in the South. You see that Catholic is super prevalent pretty much everywhere, and then Lutheran is going to be in the upper Midwest, and finally you see the Church of Latter-day Saints or Mormons in the Utah area and some of the areas surrounding it. So yeah, all of that is good stuff. All of that's important. This other Christians category, you guys definitely need to take a look at. It starts talking about some of the Christianity that exists in Africa, which is, again, it's super interesting to look at this because the United States and Canada pretty much fall into one category. South America pretty much into one category. Most of Asia, you know, they're staying pretty similar. But Africa is super, super diverse, and that's an interesting thing that we want to take a look at in class. Then your second universalizing religion is Islam. So we've got Christianity and Islam are two major universalizing religions. And this is something that's super interesting because a lot of you guys and people in general don't really know a lot about Islam. There's two important branches. You got the Sunnis and you got the Shiites. Sunni is 83% of the Muslims, okay? And so that's going to be predominantly your Southwest Asia, and your North Africa. Okay, and then your Shiite population is going to be right here in the Middle East, which is interesting because when we think about it, we think of Islam being associated with the Middle East, and that actually only represents a small percentage of the Muslim population. So your third universalizing religion is Buddhism, right? And so a lot of people would be sitting here thinking, and they're like, I would think that it would be Hinduism, or I would think that it would be Judaism, because those are the major ones that you guys think of. Buddhism might not be the first one that comes to y'all's head. But Buddhism is a universalizing religion because by the definition, it doesn't necessarily mean that it has a ton of people that adhere to it. All it means is that it exists in lots of different places, which isn't the case for Judaism, and it's certainly not the case for Hinduism, which we're going to see on the next page. So yeah, you guys want to make sure that you know the different branches of Buddhism as well. But then we get to Hinduism, and Hinduism is going to be the largest ethnic religion. And it has over 900 million adherents, okay, which means there's 900 people that follow it. But the reason that it's going to fall into that ethnic religion is this right here, because 90% of the Hindus live in India, with 2% living in Bangladesh, 3% living in Nepal, and then 5% living anywhere else in the world. And so that's going to make it definitely an ethnic religion. And then the same thing can be said with Taoists. You see 96% of them are going to be in China, and 2% are in Taiwan. There's only another 2% anywhere else in the world. And so that's interesting. There's Chinese traditional ethnic language or ethnic religions. You see that with Confucianism. We already talked about Taoism a little bit. And then you see primal indigenous, so like things like pagan. But the other one that you guys definitely need to know, because it's going to be on the test, is African traditional, or it's otherwise known as animism. And animism is basically like where inanimate objects or things like natural disasters have like a soul, or like a being behind them. And obviously, as we saw earlier, this isn't something that everyone adheres to, but it's definitely something that some people do. And so that's interesting and something that you guys need to know. Finally, Judaism. It is the first of the major religions to follow monotheism. Everything prior to that had been polytheism. So when you guys think about like the ancient Greek religions or ancient Roman religions, these are places that had a pantheon of gods, a ton of gods. Judaism said that there was one. And so mono means one, poly means many. And so that's where that comes from. So that's super, super interesting and super important. And then this is the last thing. Here we see a map of 1900 Africa and then 1990 Africa. And so 1900 Africa shows you that there was a lot of people in Africa that were still believing those traditional religions. That number has certainly dwindled today. And this brings us back to the question that we saw with culture, and that is this something that we should be striving to keep? Is this are these ethnic religions, are these folk cultures important to maintain, or is it okay that globalization is making some of these things go away? And that's the question that I'm going to leave you guys with. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask in class, but that sums up key issue 1.